John, as you may or may not know, in his previous life was a psychiatrist at the West LA VA. And he had a very novel idea, along with another cousin of mine who thought that maybe because the VA was sitting on the most valuable property in the world, that maybe instead of all those parking lots, they could figure out a way to lease that land to a big private developer and have all the proceeds go to pay for the things that the VA isn't paying for. Talk about public-private partnerships. That was not a bad idea, John. You would have thought that this president would have loved that idea of exhausting private developer and getting a social good out of it. Hasn't happened yet. But I'm glad that you put those blueprints on the drawing board so that perhaps that the day will come where that idea gets adopted. I mean, because it really is so profound if you could get all that new money to help address all of the homeless veterans. If you could just get that percentage of Los Angeles' homeless population and get them treated with the dignity and respect they deserve, using the dollars from the very property set aside to ensure that they were properly cared for. Boy, what a difference that could be. But that's talk about foresight. That's the kind of thinking that you all are in the midst of trying to engage in. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to you, John, and you can discuss that for just a second so that we have a little bit of a segue into the foresight that goes into also doing this new process of bringing everybody into an accountability effort by including all the services as part of those that people are being held accountable to.
Thank you, Patrick. And every time I get to hang out with you and listen to you introduce these topics, it hits me right in the heart. Because you actually capture the fundamental themes of the work that we're trying to do here, whether you know it or not. I mean, we had a little debrief, but what you're talking about with community is the core, and what you're talking about with inclusion is core. The West LA VA campus is actually designed to be a community. It was a community. It was a part of the National Home for Disabled Veterans, donated in 1888. Had thousands of veterans living on it in a sustainable way. And now it's largely desolate, and hopefully we will move forward. What I really would like to focus on here is an effort in LA County that I think is got a lot of promise as a transformative initiative and partnership here in LA, but across the state. And that's one of the reasons why I've got these amazing colleagues with me here on stage. But just as an overview, there's a term in California, which I didn't know when I got here, FSP, Full Service Partnership, which is really kind of a California term for ACT, Assertive Community Treatment. And while it's been a very important and impactful model in the state of California, it has not had the impact that it might. And the Full Service Partnership programs across this state are funded in large part by Prop 63, the Mental Health Service Act, that, as many of you know, was authored by Darrell Steinberg, who is seriously with us in spirit today, because he really wanted to come. But he's in somewhere in Northern California, serving on a special assignment for our new governor to take care of homelessness. The Full Service Partnership Program is one that in LA County actually accounts for about $300 million of contracts that are delivered by our providers around the community. And one of the things that has been challenging is to support the providers in doing the best work. And what we've done is we've actually, with great help from the Ballmer Foundation initially, and we have the executive director of the Ballmer Foundation here next to me, Nina Revoyer. Their investment has been made to help us create performance-based contracts. Performance-based contracts are actually something that are quite foreign, I would say, in real terms, in the government and government contracts generally, certainly in the health and human service industry. And Nina, what I'd like you to do is maybe talk a little bit about your investment and what you're looking to achieve. And I have to thank you very much as a colleague in making this investment and believing in us.
Well, first of all, thank you for that. It's an honor to share the stage with all of you. Thank you for that opening context. And thanks to all of you. I cannot believe that there are this many people here, 4:30 at the end of a long day of a conference. So thank you so much. You are hardcore. Obviously, I know it helps to have a Kennedy on stage and that draw. No illusion that it has anything to do. Sorry, John. Definitely not with but just.
As long as my good looks and personality.
That too, for sure. But I think just want to give a little bit of context of Ballmer Group's interest in this, and then also maybe a little bit of my own interests, given that until 3 years ago, I was on the service side of things, and so understood what it was like to be a contractor, with DMH. So Ballmer Group, for those of you who don't know, is the philanthropic effort of Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Clippers and former Microsoft CEO, and his wife, Connie. The entire effort is based around economic mobility and intergenerational poverty in the United States, with the core regions being Seattle, where they live, Detroit, where Steve is from, and then Los Angeles, where the Clippers are, and which obviously is a very important place. And so the way that the Ballmers think about working on issues of poverty and economic mobility is that this is not a single issue. There's not one factor that causes people to be in poverty, and so therefore there's not one solution to get them out, which has led to a comprehensive way of looking at things that includes things like early childhood and K-12 and workforce for sure, but also things like built environment, criminal justice reform, and mental and behavioral health. Because one of the things that we know, and I know this both from my long time working in nonprofits and in education before coming on the philanthropy side, and in my own upbringing, is that so many of the issues that we see kids present with that appear to be behavioral problems, that appear to be emotional problems, are the result of trauma, and often untreated trauma, particularly in low-income communities of color. And so that's the tie for Ballmer Group, is really trying to address that. And also, the other thing to say about the foundational work is that we believe very strongly in working with government. For a couple of reasons. The first is that the public sector is where the money is. Across the country, the government puts forward about $1.3 trillion each year in funding to serve low-income people. That's not even including education. All of philanthropy together is only about 6% of that. So the bang for the buck in terms of private money versus public money is just not comparable. And so one of the things that we believe that philanthropy can do is to leverage the public money to have greater impact. The other thing that's important is the focus on systems change. I come from a nonprofit, worked for a great nonprofit for many years, and when we work for nonprofits and support nonprofits, though we are only really kind of helping the people that one nonprofit serves. But if you really want to have impact on a larger scale, then you have to go to systems change. And that's what we're trying to do here. The way that government typically, from the county and onward, has supported things is by supporting outputs, numbers of people served, compliance focused, et cetera, not focusing as much on what actually happens to the kids and families who are served by those funds and those services. And so the hope in investing in the work that the Department of Mental Health is doing, and to be specific, what we invested was a third-party contractor, third sector, who the county already had a relationship with, to help them revamp their contracting practices to be more outcomes oriented. And I thank you for your thanks, but really, it's you guys. What we are doing is facilitating the work that you're trying to do. This requires the leadership and vision of folks at the county, and we have had that with a really progressive set of supervisors right now, with department heads like Dr. Sharon, and we are just so excited about the work that's happened to date and just very proud to be a part of this.
Nina, could you just talk a little bit more about how little sophistication there is in terms of how grant makers have gone about giving grants? And if the Balmers are really looking for systems change, it'd be very helpful for just philanthropy to understand where the ROI is in any number of parts of that spectrum and continuum, so that if you get certain people, their child died of addiction, but others it's suicide, or others they have this, they can be specific just like they do with United Way and target that particular area for philanthropy, but they can know that they're part of a greater whole in terms of what it's going to achieve, because it's not going to be acting outside of being in unison to all of these other efforts. So I just think that there's a literacy issue here, even amongst philanthropists, and how, especially in this space, particularly.
Yeah, I'll say a couple things to that. The first is, and again, having been on the service side for so long, no one held us accountable for how our kids and families did. And that is a difference. And on the flip side of that, there was incredible rigidity on how the money was managed. And so this kind of flips the script a little bit, where there's more flexibility in order to do the things that kids and families actually need, but you are holding yourselves accountable and then holding providers accountable in outcomes that providers are helping you to develop for what happens for kids and families. And so I think that's one part. And I would say that also that we as a philanthropy, and I don't want to speak for philanthropy overall, that we are very uncomfortable telling people, we would not tell people what the outcome should be. That we depend on local leadership, whether that's government or communities, to tell us what outcomes they are trying to get to. And I'll give a couple of examples of where we're supporting essentially what's a workforce effort here in Los Angeles called Slate Z, which was led by LA Trade Tech, community organizations. There was also quite a bit of elected official involvement in that. That's all around workforce and moving people to living wage jobs. We didn't tell them what the goals should be. We came in late to the game, but once they set the goals, we're supporting their work to try and get to those goals. And so that's just one example, but those are the kinds of things. And so not imposing, but still having this outcomes orientation where we want to know that the needle has been moved on whatever you are laying out as your goals.
Thanks, Nina. We don't have a lot of time. There's a lot of detail in the work that we're doing here. And I want to, what I want to let people know is that in essence, what we're trying to do here in LA County with a very generous gift from the Ballmer Foundation that allowed a group called Third Sector Capital to come in and help us re-engineer our contracts so that they're performance-based and that they require outcomes, that they're not about providing a certain type of service a certain number of times for a certain person, because that doesn't necessarily translate. But that work has actually started to get a fair amount of attention across the state of California. And one of the reasons is because this FSP service is probably the largest book of business in public mental health in California. When it was recognized that this work was happening in Los Angeles County, a commission, the Oversight and Accountability Commission, which is chaired by Kitera, our panelist at the end, recognized that there were other counties that wanted to kind of get on board. And what the OAC did with the leadership of Toby Ewing, Toby, where are you? There he is. Hey, Toby. Is they actually invested in this same group to take the lessons learned, the fundamental contract approaches that we're doing here in Los Angeles County, to fund it for 15 other counties. So the work that was kind of seeded by the Ballmer Foundation is now impacting what I call the meat and potatoes of community-based mental health services in 16 counties of California. So Katera, maybe you could talk a little bit about the FSP model, what it means to you, the hopes and visions for the OAC for this crew.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Sharon. And I also want to thank you all. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. For me, the FSPs, and for a lot of us in the communities, it was what I think mobilized many people around the state when we started advocating for Prop 63 to get passed. It's what our communities needed. It's the highest level of community care in our counties. And FSPs, again, there is no wrong door. Do whatever it takes to help someone are the approaches, the models that you take. So for our mental health system, you can go into seek help and you're turned away by providers because they don't have the resources to help you with going back to school or getting housing and doing all these other critical pieces in someone's recovery. And so full service partnerships is all about that. Full service, whatever your goals are to get back and to achieve wellness and recovery is what FSPs are about. And for me, as a person who has experienced mental health challenges as a young child, and also in my later on in life, and have been suicidal. Being an advocate for FSPs and seeing this collaboration between private and public sector to expand the impact that we have gives me hope. We need to see more programs like FSPs thrive and do well. And so I think it's really exciting to create this way where our contracting at the county level focuses on the outcomes, not just the numbers of people we serve, but actually seeing reduction in hospitalizations, seeing reductions in incarcerations, seeing increases in going back to school or getting employment, and also seeing people hopeful about their future. The other thing about FSPs, and I think LA County is a leader in this, is that you also have a peer-led FSP, which is really exciting, and it's something that I'm a big advocate for, and that is the people who have experienced the mental health system get an opportunity to get trained and then work in the mental health system and give back to others. And when you think about our workforce shortage in mental health, there is, within the public sector and obviously public mental health sector, those of us receiving services in that system, we have an 80% percentage of unemployment. It doesn't mean we don't want jobs. It means we do. It just means we haven't been given the opportunity. And these kind of jobs are so meaningful. To be able to not have these limitations and say, oh, you need housing support? Well, I'm not going to send you to another agency or another program. I'm going to walk with you and find a way to get that goal met and support you on your journey. So thank you for supporting, the public sector with your resources that's more nimble and the commission is committed to that, and LA County has been a leader, and now 15 other counties, and hopefully the rest of the state will continue in your footsteps.
Well, thank you, Katera, and thank you for helping to spearhead this effort of peer support. Everyone gives lip service to it, but I can tell you it really is not getting much uptake. If it weren't for efforts of people like you, if we didn't have these kinds of opportunities to change what we mean by the delivery system, we really can't do much worse than what we're doing today. Honestly, it's no offense to anybody in the space. They're overwhelmed with what they have to do, but it's shocking that we expect to get anything out of this current system that's any different than what we've gotten in the past. And so we have to try new things. And as someone who's in long-term recovery, that means for me that I haven't had to drink or drug since February 22nd, 2011. But I say that, and my fellows in recovery tell their time so that we can show people who are just starting off that it is possible. There's nothing like someone who's struggling to know that someone who was there in their shoes, knows what they've been through, can walk them through this process like you said. It's so powerful. It's so much more powerful than someone who just sees you as part of their daily job as opposed to part of their mission. And the irony is, and it's the most confounding thing, that you are helped when you give help to other people. But if in the process of that you can earn a living and you can be a help to, in a very real way, medical costs, well, why isn't the medical system paying your salary? All I know is Blue Cross Blue Shield New Jersey owes, I was just talking to the CEO of North Carolina, Patrick Conway, former CMO of CMS, who adopted collaborative care codes. While it was, what a novel concept. You get paid for talking to each other as clinicians so that you can both get a better idea as to what your patient needs. Imagine, never paid for by CMS before. These are the changes that need to be taking place. But Horizon Blue Cross has not had to pay for one inpatient detox or rehab for me in 8 years. Furthermore, they've not had to pay for one contusion or broken limb, or one traumatic brain injury because I was under the influence. And so the impact of this is profound. It's all from walking down a set of stairs every morning at a church basement not far from where I live. And that still can exist separate from peer support, but I can tell you there's a lot of power from that 12-step recovery movement that has direct translation into us really spurring a new commitment to the service of people who are just marginalized because of a lack of connectivity to them. There's no respect for people who are living on the street. I have to say, I think we all have to examine our own conscience when we walk down the street. We walk around people who frighten us. But if you've been there, you're less likely to walk around. Not there's a guarantee that you won't, but you're less likely. And that little bit of change in your spirit, the way you look at it, is enough to change, as they say in the mitzvah, change the world by each single act that can be taken place. So you've been acknowledged to be a big leader in that peer support, and I know the legislature is about to do something on this, right?
Yeah, the commission, along with LA County and the Steinberg Institute, are a sponsor of Senator Bell's Senate Bill 10, peer specialist certification. So we are trying to get California aligned with the rest of the country around getting this peer certification. But it's not that we haven't done a lot of work around peer services. We haven't. So hopefully Governor Gavin Newsom will sign the bill. It has passed the Senate, the Assembly, and it's on its way to the governor's desk. And a lot of peers across the state are sending him postcards telling them to support peer certification. And one of the pieces that I think we haven't touched a little bit is, we talked about this morning also I feel like the stigma around the prejudice, the discrimination that people experience when they come out and talk about their story of that they've struggled with mental health challenges. It's intense. But when you're able to work with someone that shares their story, and like you just said, Patrick, that level of mutuality helps increase hope when so many of our community members lose hope because life has become too tough for them. And so I think that our opportunity to really bring down federal dollars to pay for the peer services and expand the workforce around peers is that is innovation. That is the future, I feel, of mental health, is that more and more people are not only going to come out about their mental health issues to bust the stigma, but they also are going to hire more peers as our leaders throughout the state.
And Nina, tell us a little bit about what else is going on in the State House in terms of the refresh of Mental Health Services Act and what that will do to help this partnership that John and others are trying to take forward.
I'm going to be really brief because we're getting the hook sign here.
Okay.
And I think actually what I'd love to do is kick that back to John, but also want to make sure that that we should talk about numbers. Like what was a fairly, I mean, it was a significant investment, on our part at the Balmer Group. It was about a $2.5 million investment to help you do this work. But I think it would be interesting for people to know how much money that is leveraging and shifting in terms of the work that's being supported.
Yeah, the $2.5 million, 2.65, is being.
I was rounding.
Is being used for us to re-engineer that the contracts in LA County that are funded with $300 million of MHSA money. And I think it would be fair to say that by taking better care of our contractors, by driving everything we do based on the outcomes that are achieved, because we become accountable in this new model for a population of people, not for delivering services and losing people, because they're difficult to care for. And by focusing on delivering what people need, not just treatment, but addressing social determinants of health through peers who provide kinship, and support, by housing, which is a place for people to live, and by employment, because every one of our teams is going to have either an occupational therapist as well as a supported employment specialist. So by focusing on all of those things, we are expecting that we will have a massive impact on the outcomes that we achieve. So you take $300 million a year, and that number can always grow. And actually in LA County it is growing because we're doubling down on FSP. And you have that increased impact, over years. That $2.65 million investment is going to, translate into billions of dollars of savings. And I would say with help from, the catalyst at the OAC to spread this across the state, we start taking what's over $2 billion of MHSA money every year, and we're driving towards a new future. And I will say, getting back to the issue of refresh, that there are conversations, and they haven't all been easy, with Daryl, with a new leader at the state, Tom Insel, who used to run the NIMH and is a special advisor to Gavin Newsom, as well as our own Mark Galley, wrapping up, who worked here, who's now the Secretary of Health and Human Services for the state, that we're going to take MHSA from a resource that is packaged in terms of fenced-in categories of funding, and that is largely accountable to process, and we're going to flip it. And we're going to say it's not about categories of money, and it's not about process, it's about the outcomes. So when we talk about prevention, for example, which is now 20% of the money, what we're saying is, no, what are the prevention outcomes that we as a state want to achieve? Do we want to go to our community colleges where 20% of the student body is homeless? And do we want to say that 10% fewer of those students will disenroll because of a mental illness or an addiction? Because we will take care of that. That will allow us to use the money how we want, not in some prescribed way, through some kind of a program to deliver. And I would die to be, not ready to die yet, but I would love to be held accountable all day long to achieving outcomes for the people we serve and to take care of them and not the auditors and the medical charts, which all of our staff do every day to the detriment, frankly, of their of their morale. And this is a big part of the transformation. The big part of the transformation is drive everything from the trenches. What people need is what we have to give them, and help us achieve those goals rather than forcing us to do certain types of programs and get funded because they're allowable services.
Well, I can tell you, for many of us, watching the news on any given day or reading the headlines can be pretty depressing. Just speaking for myself, of course. But listening to these panelists talk about taking on really one of the great challenges of our time, an existential challenge of our time, whether we're going to continue to ignore these diseases and whether we're going to continue to ignore these people who suffer from them or not, is a great test of our civilization. And here you have people who are committed to trying to change the way we have always operated in a way that has left us in such shambles as a nation, where we're literally seeing a reduction in our overall lifetime capacity as Americans because of the deaths of despair. So God bless all of you for what you're doing to help not only change things in LA County and California, but that I can tell you, when they say what happens in California can also affect other parts of the country. From another part of the country, we're really excited about whatever you can come and give us in terms of your experience from all this, and so make it happen. Thank you very much.